Hello, and welcome to Toya in Stitches. I'm Toya. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make this mesh tunic. We're going to start off by gathering our supplies, then we'll take our measurements, do some quick math, and then we'll start stitching. So let's jump right in. All right, so to make our shirt, we're going to first need our yarn. For me, I'm using this Comfy Cotton blend from Lion Brand. It is a 50-50 blend of cotton and polyester, and the cake is 7 ounces. And for the 7 ounces, you get 392 yards. It is also a category 3 light, and this color here is called Lovey Dovey. And with this, I'm going to be using a 7mm hook because I want my stitches to be quite loose. And you'll also need a tape measure, scissors, tapestry needle, and a bunch of stitch markers. So go ahead, grab your supplies, and let's get started. Okay, so to start our top, we're gonna need to take a few of our measurements. So for this, we're only gonna need a few. We're gonna need our bust measurement, how long we want our top to be, or armhole depth, how wide we want our neck opening, how deep you want your slit, and your sleeve length. So we're going to start. So to take your bust measurement, you just want to measure around the widest part of your bust. So just go ahead and measure around the widest part of your bust and record that measurement. And then from the top of your shoulder to where you want the base of your armhole to stop. So it's going to start there, and wherever you want it to stop, just record the measurement. For me, I'm going for about 7.5 to 8 inches. So I'm just going to record that there. And now you need to know how long you want your top to be. So if you want it to be, whether you want it to be a crop top, hip length, or you want it to go longer like mine, you just want to place your tape measure on top of your shoulder and then just take it down until you get to where you want it. I'm going for a little higher than mid thigh, which gave me about 28 inches for me. So that's what I'm going to write down for my length. And then for my neck opening, I went with about 10 inches. So just kind of placing the halfway mark of the 5 across my chest, just to kind of know where the opening of the neck is going to start. So it's going to start about here on one side and then end on this side. So you just want to figure out how wide you want that neck opening to be. You can go wider if you want it to kind of start to fall off your shoulder. So just figure out how wide you want that to be. And then for the side slit, for me, I started my slit at my waist and then just left it open from there. So you just have to find your natural waist and then measure to your 28 inches. So if I start up there and then I grab my 28 inches there, and then I find my natural waist here, that's a difference of about 10 inches. And then once you put it together, you can sew it and you can open up or close the seam as you go. And now for what I find to be like the trickiest thing to map out is the arm length. So for me, what I do is I take my tape measure, and with the 0 in the very center, so this little indent in my neck right here, that's where I'm going to start to measure. And I want my sleeve to be about 3/4, so I want it to end just below my elbow. So I'm just going to hold my arm out straight, making sure my arm's in line with my shoulder. And just kind of looking at my tape measure, I see for me that measurement's going to be about 21 inches. If you want it to go all the way to your wrist, just record how long that is. For me, if I wanted it to go to my wrist, it would be about 29. So just record how long you want your sleeve. Get someone to help you if you need a little assistance. And if someone's helping you, they can measure it from the center of your neck, so where your spine is, all the way to your wrist. So just write that measurement down, and then I'm going to show you how to work out your sleeve length. And for all of our measurements, I will walk you through it as we're putting the piece together. So we'll start with the bust to do the panels, armhole depth to do the width of the sleeve. But before we jump into all of that, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to work out the sleeve length with you, just so you can get the perfect length, because that's always a tricky thing for me, especially whether I'm working from a garment or if I'm doing it by myself. I've sort of figured out this method just to make sure that I get my sleeve length the exact length I want it to be. So note your measurements, and then we'll work out our sleeve length, and then we'll jump in to start working on our top. Okay, so to work out our sleeve length, we're just going to do a quick little bit of math. And to figure out how to get my sleeve length pretty accurate, I had read a blog post about 4 or 5 months ago. I will find it and link it in the description for you. But also, if you would like me to make a video going in detail of how to do this, just let me know in the comments and I can do that for you. But just for the purpose of this video, to keep it short, just trust me and do this. So you're going to take your total bust measurement plus whatever ease you're adding to your garment. So for me, my bust is 34 and I'm adding 2 inches of positive ease. So now my total bust measurement that I'm working with is going to be 36 inches. So I'm going to take 36 inches and divide it by 4. And when I do that, I'm going to get 9. So I'm going to get 9 inches. So what I need to do now is take my arm length measurement. So for me, because I was working with a 3/4 length sleeve, when I took that measurement from the center of my neck to where I want my sleeve to end, I got 21 inches. So now what I need to do is subtract 9 from 21. So I need to take my arm length and minus the 9 inches, which will then give me 12 inches. So now I know my sleeve length needs to be 12 inches. So when I'm working on my sleeve, I need to make a sleeve that is 12 inches long in order for it to get to sit just below my elbow and give me that 21 inches, because when you're working with a drop sleeve, we have to remember that a portion of the front and back of the garment sits on our arm. So we always want to subtract that portion from our total sleeve length. So if you do this for me, your sleeve length will be just as long as you want it to be. So take your total bust measurement that you're working with, divide it by 4, and then whatever you get. So for me, I'm working with a bust of 36. I divided it by 4 and I got 9 inches. I measured my arm length to be 21 inches so that I can have a 3/4 length sleeve, and I subtract 9 from that number to then give me 12. So I'm going to make a 12-inch long sleeve, which once added to my garment, I will have a 3/4 length sleeve. So just go ahead and work out this little bit of math so you know how long your sleeve will be. And as we're going through the rest of it, we will work out our measurements as we go. So now you can go and grab your yarn and your hook and we'll get started on stitching. Now that we have our measurements, now we just need to do some quick calculations and then we can get started with our stitching. So my bust measured 34 inches. So to that 34 inches, I'm going to add 2 inches just so that my top doesn't fit snug. It's just going to skim right over the body. It's not going to be too close. So what I'm going to do is add 2 inches to my 34 inches, which will give me 36 inches. And then I'm going to divide that number by 2, which then gives me 18 inches. So my front panel and back panel are each going to measure 18 inches wide. Our stitch pattern is worked over a multiple of 3 plus 2. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain a multiple of 3 until I get to about 18 inches. And then I'm going to add the extra 2 chains plus a turning chain. So what I'm going to end up with is a total of a multiple of 3, because for my first row, I'm going to do just a row of half double crochet, and then I'm going to get into the pattern stitch, which is then worked over a multiple of 3 plus 2. But we'll get to all of that. So just start out by chaining a multiple of 3. So I'm going to make a slip knot. Then I'm going to put that on my hook. And now I'm going to chain a multiple of 3 until I get to my 18 inches. Okay, so I've laid out my chain and I like to just kind of flatten it out just so it doesn't kink up when I try to measure it. So I'll grab my tape measure And here I am. I've got about 18 inches, which is good. And for me, that's a total of 63 chains, which gives me a multiple of 3. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work a half double crochet in the second chain from my hook. And I'm going to be working into the bottom bump of my chain just because I like how it finishes off. So now I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into the second chain from my hook, and then I'm going to work a half double crochet. Yarn over, insert into my next chain, and work a half double crochet. And I'm just going to continue working half double crochet stitches all the way across my chain, working into the bottom bump, and then I'll meet you when I get to the end of my chain. Okay, so I finished working my row of half double crochet, and now we're going to move on to row 2. And before I moved on, I made sure to count my stitches to make sure I have a multiple of 3 plus 2 before moving on. So now I'm going to turn. And our stitch pattern is basically filet, which is double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. But what I did was add 2 double crochet stitches before I chained, just so it didn't turn out to be as open as regular filet. And to start each of my rows, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be working a stacked single crochet to bring it up to the height of the double crochet. I just like how that sits on the side of the open stitches better than like chaining or doing anything else. And normally when you work a stacked single crochet, you don't chain 1 before working the first single crochet. But for me, I find when I chain 1, it gives me more surface area pretty much to work into when I'm sewing everything together. So this is how I work my stacked single crochet stitches. So I chain 1. Then I work a single crochet in this first stitch here. And then I take my hook and I'm going to insert it through this little leg of the single crochet stitch right here. So I'm just going to insert my hook right here without chaining. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and work another single crochet. So it's just working 1 single crochet on top of another one. Okay, so let's do that again. I'm going to pull this out. So I'm going to start by chaining 1, then I'm going to work a single crochet in this stitch. Now I'm going to insert my hook under this leg of the single crochet. Going to yarn over and pull up a loop, and now I'm going to yarn over and just work another single crochet just like that. And I'll show you again when we get to row 3. So what you're going to do now is work a double crochet in your next stitch. Now we're going to chain 1 and work and skip this next stitch and then work 2 double crochets. So yarn over, skip that stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, and then another double crochet. And this is what the first little section of it. So pretty much this is your stitch pattern right here. It's 2 double crochet, chain 1, 2 double crochets. So we're going to do that again. We're going to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then work a double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And you're going to continue repeating that until you get to the end of your row. So just continue doing that and I'll meet you at the end of the row. So I'm almost at the end of my row 2. I have 3 stitches left. So all I'm going to do now is just chain 1, skip that stitch and then work a double crochet in my last 2 stitches, just like that. And then when you're working your last stitch, just remember sometimes your half double crochets, they tend to tilt to the front. So just be sure to turn it towards you so you don't miss it, and just work a double crochet in your last stitch. And then we'll move on to row 3. So as we did when we were starting row 2, we're going to start with a stacked single crochet. And as I did with row 2, I start with a chain 1. And if you've worked stacked single crochets before and you prefer to work it without the chain 1, you can go ahead and do that. But what I will do is when we get to seaming the front and back panel together, I'll show you why I used the chain 1. So we'll chain 1 and then we're going to work a single crochet in our first stitch. And now we're going to insert our hook into this loop right here on the side of the single crochet. We're going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and then we're going to complete our stacked single crochet. So that'll always be your first stitch of every row. Now we're going to work another double crochet in the next stitch. And now we're going to chain 1. And row 3 is only different from row 2 in the sense that now you're going to be chaining 1 over top of a chain 1, and then you're going to be working double crochets into the tops of double crochet stitches. So now we're going to yarn over and work a double crochet in the next 2 double crochet stitches. Now we're going to chain 1, which will sit over top or chain 1 from the previous row, and then we're going to work a double crochet in each of the next 2 double crochet stitches. Chain 1, and then double crochet into double crochet stitches, and you're just going to repeat that all the way to the end of your row 3. So go ahead and do that and I'll meet you there. I'm just about finished with my row 3, so I'm just going to chain 1 and work my last 2 stitches. All right, so I'm done with row 3, and before we move on to row 4, what I like to do when I'm working in this method where I'm not working with a swatch and a specific number of stitches to form my piece, when I get to after I've completed my first few rows, I like to lay it out and measure it just to see how much my piece has grown so that I can make any adjustments that are necessary at this stage rather than waiting until I'm almost finished. So what we're going to do is we're just going to lay our piece flat, and then I'm just going to grab my measuring tape, measure it out and see where I'm at. Okay, so I am now at just about 19 inches. And for me, where I started with a chain of about 18 inches, so it's grown about 1 inch. So if your piece has grown 2 or 3 inches, you're gonna want to make any adjustments at this stage. And so for mine, where it's an extra inch, this is gonna be an extra inch on each panel, which will give me an overall of an extra 2 inches. So instead of working with 2 inches of ease, if I leave it like this, I'm gonna end up with 4 inches. So where I started with a bust of 34 plus 2 to give me an overall measurement of 36, with this, now I'm going to be up to about 38, which I'm okay with. I'm not gonna really rip it out and make any adjustments. That's still not too oversized for me. I'm comfortable with that. But what you wanna do is, for me, I was over by 1 inch. So you just want to lay your tape measure down, see how many stitches are within 1 inch for you. So that way you can rip it out and decrease that number of stitches and then start again. So for me, I would have taken out 3 stitches if I wanted to make that adjustment to bring it from the 19 back down to 18. So just kind of lay it out, measure it out, make your adjustments before you're finished with the panel, just so you don't complete the piece and then it's too big. And then we all know how it goes. We get frustrated and then we just don't finish it off. So I'm okay where I'm at. Take your measurements, make your adjustments before moving on. So for me, I'm going to continue repeating row 3 until my piece is as long as I want it. And then I'm going to pop back in and show you how to finish off the panel, because we're going to finish off with a row of half double crochet, just the same way we started. So continue working until your piece is as long as you want it to be, then pop back in and we'll just finish it off before we continue on to making our second panel. All right, so I'm almost finished with my first panel. It's about as long as I want it. So now I'm just going to finish off with a row of half double crochet. So what you're going to do is, once you've measured it out and you're at the length you want, we're just going to turn our work and we're going to chain 1. We're going to work a half double crochet in the first 2 stitches. So we're going to yarn over, work a half double crochet in the first stitch, half double crochet in the second stitch. And then when we get to our chain spaces, we're just going to work a half double crochet into the chain space. Just like that. Then a half double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And then a half double crochet into the chain space. And you're just going to continue working like that right until you get to the end of your row, which is where you would fasten off. So just continue working half double crochet stitches into the tops of stitches and into the chain spaces until you get to the end of your row. All right, and once you get to the end of your row and you work your last half double crochet, you can just work a slip stitch, cut your yarn and fasten it off. And then you'll put this aside, and now we'll go ahead and we'll make one more panel exactly like we did this one, and then we'll make our sleeves. Okay, now we're going to work on our sleeves. I've already made one of my sleeves. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how to do it. But the sleeve is worked almost exactly the same as our front and back panel. The only difference is that where we start with a row of half double crochet, when we're working our sleeves, we won't finish it off with a row of half double crochet. We're just gonna, once we achieve our sleeve length, we're gonna stop there. We're not going to add that extra row of half double crochet. Okay, so now to get your sleeve measurement. For me, my armhole depth is about 7.5, 8 inches is what I like personally for myself. So for my sleeve, that it has to be twice that number. So my sleeve has to be about 15 to 16 inches wide. So what we're going to do, just like we did with our front and our back panels, we're going to chain until we achieve our twice or desired armhole depth. So for me, as I said, I'm going for about 7.5 to 8 inches. So I'm going to chain until I have about 15 to 16 inches. So I am just going to put that aside. Then I'm going to grab my yarn, just like we did when we started. I'm going to make a slip knot. And I'm going to chain a multiple of 3 until I get to 15, 16 inches. All right, so I'm laying my chain down and I'm going to measure out to see where I'm at right now. Okay, and right now I'm at about 14 inches and I'm gonna stop here because I remember from working my front and back panel that once I started working stitches into my chain, it grew about 1 inch. So because I don't want my sleeve to be too wide, I know if I work with this 14 inches here and then work my stitches into it, it's gonna grow to about the size that I want it. So I'm gonna leave it there and then I'm just gonna start working my stitches. So I have my multiple of 3. I'm going to skip my first chain and just work a half double crochet in the second chain from my hook. And now I'm going to work a half double crochet in the second chain and in each chain all the way across, just like I did when I worked my front and back panel. So just work your row of half double crochet and I'll meet you at the end of the row. All right, so I finished my row of half double crochet. So now we're going to move into our pattern stitch. So now remember, in our first stitch, we're going to work a stacked single crochet, and I chain one, work a single crochet in that first stitch, and then through this loop here, we're just going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, then yarn over, pull through both loops on our hook. Then we're going to work a double crochet in the next stitch, chain one, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the following stitch, work another double crochet, chain one, skip the next stitch, a double crochet in the next two stitches, chain one, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the next two stitches, and we'll just continue repeating that until we get to the end of the row. All right, so I'm finishing off my row 2, and now we'll turn and move into row 3. We're going to chain one and work a stacked single crochet, then a double crochet in the next stitch, chain one, and we're going to skip over that chain space and then work a double crochet in the next two double crochet stitches, chain one, skip the chain space, and then double crochet in the next two double crochet stitches. All right, and I'm going to continue working until I get to the end of my row 3. Then I'll come back, measure out my sleeve to make sure the sizing is good, and then I'll leave you to work on the sleeves before we come back and sew it all together. So I'll meet you at the end of row 3. Okay, so I'm at the end of row 3. So now I'm just going to lay it down and measure it out just to make sure that I have the right width. So here we go. So here I am at about 15.5 inches, which is perfect. So I'm now going to continue working row 3. I'm just going to continue repeating row 3 until my sleeve is as long as I want it. And remember, once your sleeve gets to the length that you want it, don't work a row of half double crochet to finish it off. Just leave it on a row of just our regular pattern stitch, just like this, because when we're sewing it together, this is going to be the side we attach to our shoulder, and then this will be the edge of your sleeve, so you don't need the additional row of half double crochet. So continue working row 3, finish off your sleeve, work 2 sleeves. So once you've done that, then come back and we'll sew it all together. Okay, so I'm all done. I've got sleeves and I've got my 2 panels. So now it's time to start putting it together. So I'm going to put the sleeves aside. And first we're going to work out our neck opening. So we're going to grab our 2 pieces. And we're going to hold them together, ensuring that we have our ending rows together and our starting rows together. All right, so that's where I started, and this is where I finished. So we're gonna need a few stitch markers. So let me grab my stitch markers. And you want to lay the top of your piece down nice and flat. And then just pull one down. So then on your back panel, you're going to grab your tape measure and you're going to measure out how wide you want your neck opening. So mine is 10 inches because I want it fairly wide, but I don't want it to start falling off my shoulders. So what I like to do is I'm going to take my tape measure and measure out 10 inches and see how many stitches are inside that 10 inches. So I have about 32 stitches inside my 10 inches. All right. So now what we need to find is the center line of our piece. I know I started out with, I have 62 stitches all the way across. So if I divide my 62 by 2, I'm going to end up with 31. So I'm going to mark that stitch. Just make sure I have the same number on the other side. Okay, so I have exactly 31 stitches from this stitch marker to that end, and from this stitch to this end, I also have 31 stitches. So when I measured out my 10 inches, I got 32 stitches. So now what I'm going to do from this stitch right here, I'm going to count to my left 16. So that's 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to mark that stitch. And then from where I had my stitch marker, I'm going to count 16 going to the right. Then I'm going to mark that stitch. All right, and then I'm going to grab my tape measure. And there I have my 10 inches from this stitch marker to that stitch marker. So now my neck opening is the width that I want it to be. So now all I have to do on this one is just line up my stitches evenly. And then open up my stitch marker and lock those 2 stitches together. Then I'm going to do the same on this end. Okay, so now we have our neck opening. So now what we need to do is we're going to sew from our stitch marker to the end of our piece. Just need to seam the shoulders together. So I'm going to grab a tapestry needle and I'm going to show you how I do that. Okay, so I've just laid my piece flat and brought my ends together. And because it's reversible, it doesn't matter which side is facing you because you can wear it on either side. And I'm going to use the mattress stitch to sew my pieces together. So I'm going to get my yarn and I'm going to measure a length of yarn that's 3 times the length of the area I want to sew together. So that's 1, 2, 3. And I grab my scissors and I cut my yarn. Then I'm going to get a tapestry needle and I'm just going to string that through. Okay, so on my first 2 stitches, I'm going to go in through the top of my stitch on the left. And then from the bottom of the stitch on the right, under the 2 loops, and then up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these 2 stitches one more time just to secure it. Just going to pull on that just to make sure it's nice and snug. And now I'm going to continue with the mattress stitch. So I'm going to go from the bottom of the stitch upwards on the left side. Then I'm going to come from the bottom of the stitch on the right side and come up. And again, we're going to go through the stitch on the left, then through the stitch on the right. Now we're just going to continue doing that until we have completed our seam. I just like to pull on it just to make sure it's snug, but don't pull too tight. You don't want the stitches to start to pucker, so just pull on it until it's snug. And then you're just going to continue working your mattress stitch or using whichever seaming method you prefer. And I like to work from the outside of the garment into the neckline so that I can pull it on and see if the neck opening is how I want it to be. And then if I need to bring it in a little bit closer, I can continue to sew it together, rather than if I work from this end out, I would have to rip out the entire seam and do it again. So I just like to work from the outside in, just so if I need to make any adjustments, I can do so before I fasten it off. So go ahead and continue sewing up your shoulder seams, and then I'll show you how to add your sleeves. Okay, now that we've completed our neckline, now we're going to sew our sleeve to the side of our garment before finally just doing the side seams. So I've started to lay out my sleeve and attach it here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the body of your garment, lay it flat, and then get your sleeve and lay it right next to it. Then you're going to find the center line of your sleeve. So for me, I have a total of 50 stitches across. So I know I will have to sew 25 stitches to the front side of my garment and then 25 stitches to the back side of my garment, just to make sure that my sleeve is evenly placed on top of the shoulder and then will fall evenly to the front and to the back. So once you have figured out how many stitches you have and how many stitches go one way and the other way, what you want to do, like I did here, is get a bunch of stitch markers and then just start to pin it to your piece so it doesn't move. So what I did was, from this side, I counted my 25 stitches from the edge to the center, and then stitch 25 I have pinned to that row of half double crochet that we finished at the top of our seam, because then that we know that is the top half of one piece of our garment. So I did that there, and then I'm going to do this side with you. So I'm going to grab a stitch marker, and then I am going to get my 25th stitch. So from this end to this stitch right here, this is number 25. I'm just going to slip a stitch marker through that stitch. And then I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to find the chain 1 on the side of this row and just pin it to that. Okay, and then I will show you where we're going to be placing our stitches, because if you remember when we did our double crochets and our stacked stitches, we chained 1. And for each row of double crochet, so for each double crochet here, that's 2 stitches. So I will now count 1, 2, and then now that's going to get attached to one row right here. So then my next 2 stitches, because your stitches and your chain 1s are going to count as a stitch, just so we evenly sew it across. So those 2 stitches are going to get connected to this row. I'll come in a little closer. And now these 2 stitches here, this one and this one here, will get attached to the side of this row. So you have a double crochet stitch, That's going to be 2 stitches, and you're going to sew these 2 stitches to that row. And I'll go over one more. So now I'm on my 3rd row. So now I should be 6 stitches down. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, and now 5 and 6 are going to get attached to this row. And then what I will do now is grab another stitch marker, put it into my 6th stitch and to the base of this stitch right here from this row. And then I'm going to continue just measuring it out until I get to the end here. So then now I have 2 stitches, that's 1 row, 2 stitches, that's 1 row, 2 stitches, this is 1 row. And I only go about 6 stitches down just so it'll stay nice and firm and together for me. So then I get this stitch here. And then just like that, you're going to pin your shoulder to your garment nice and evenly across, and then we're going to sew it together. And before we start sewing, I'm going to show you what it looks like on the side when you're going to start placing your, when you're going to start sewing, how to find the side, that chain 1 on the side of that stacked single crochet just to sew into it. So if you look at this right here, this stitch is a regular double crochet, and when you turn it on the side, you have 1 loop here and 1 loop there that you can sew into the side of the stitch. Now when we move down to that stacked single crochet, what you have here is, that is the second, that's the first single crochet that we did, because then we stitched into the top of the second one. So this right here, what that looks like a knot, that is our chain 1. So when we're sewing into it, we're going to go under what looks like the top of a stitch right here. Then you're going to come down here, and this little knot is our chain 1. So you're just going to pick up the 2 loops of this knot right here for the chain 1 and sew into that, just so you know you're evenly sewing into each row, so your sleeve doesn't start to like bunch up and pucker up because we've missed stitches. So see, double crochet, stacked single crochet, where you have what looks like the top of a stitch and then a knot. And then here we go, another double crochet. You have 2 loops on the side there, and then 2 loops. So that's the top of the stitch, and then that's the bottom where you can put 2 stitches. So when you're sewing into the stacked single crochet, this little knot right here is where you're going to go under, just like that, with your tapestry needle to sew it together, so that this is the 2 stitches of 1 row, then this is the 2 stitches of another row, just to make sure that you're evenly placing 2 stitches in the side of each row, to make sure you're evenly attaching your sleeve to the garment so you don't get it all puckered up and too tight. So go ahead and finish pinning your sleeve to your garment, and then using whatever sewing method you like. I'm going to use the mattress stitch. You can use your whip stitch if that's more comfortable. Just go ahead and sew it together. I'm going to now just get my yarn, and you're going to measure out just like we did for our seam. You're going to measure out a length of yarn that is 3 times the length of your seam. So that's 1, 2, 3. We're going to cut our yarn. I'm going to attach it to my tapestry needle. Now I'm going to finish pinning my sleeve, and then I'll come in and we'll work the first few stitches just so I can show you again how to work into the side, and then I'll leave you to attach your sleeves. So I'm ready to start sewing my sleeve to the garment, and where I'm starting, I'm going to actually be starting on a row where there's a stacked single crochet. So I'm going to zoom in for you. And as I said, I'm going to be using the mattress stitch. So I'm going to be starting over here on the left. I'm just going to insert my hook from the inside of the stitch, and I'm going to pull my yarn up. And then now working into this stacked single crochet here. Here is my knot, which is the very base of the stitch, and then this little V here is the top of that stitch. So I'm going to work under that little knot, trying not to split my yarn here. I'm going to pull that up. So now I've connected those two. So this is one stitch connected to the base of that. Then now I'm going to come back in from the inside of the next stitch, pull it up. And now I'm going to be working into the top part of that stacked single crochet, so just under that little V there. Pull my yarn through. And now for my next two stitches, which is now a chain and another stitch, I'm going to be going under the top V of that chain stitch. And now I'm going to be working into the side of a double crochet, so I'm going to be going into those two loops on the side right there. Then I'm going to come under my next stitch. And now I'm going to be working into the top of that double crochet. So just to turn it here, it's these two loops right here. Just going to pull my yarn to tighten that seam. And then now I'm back on a row with a stacked single crochet. I'll do this one with you, and then I'll leave you to complete your seaming. So now I'm going to go under this stitch right here. And then I'm going to find that little knot, that chain that we made on the side of that stacked single crochet, and we're going to go under that. Then I'm going to go under the top V of my chain stitch. And then I'm going to tilt it. I'm going to find that little V of my stacked single crochet, the side there, and I'm just going to work under that. And you're just going to continue working just like that as you go up your seam, just to evenly make sure you're placing 2 stitches in the side of each row. So just continue sewing your seam, attaching one shoulder and then the other, and then we'll come back and we'll do our side seams, and then we'll be done. All right, so I have attached both my sleeves. So now we're in the home stretch. We're going to measure out our side slits, and then we're going to seam, do our side seam and finish seaming our shoulder together, and then we'll be all done. Okay, so for me, my side slit is about 10 inches, but you just measure out how much you want for your slit. So I'm going to go ahead and measure mine. So I want about 10 inches. Then I'm going to count how many rows I have inside those 10 inches. $16. All right, so I'm going to grab a stitch marker. I am going to mark the top of that row. And then I'm going to count the same number of rows on my back panel. And then I am just going to connect them with the stitch marker. I'm just going to make sure that it's nice and even. All right, so all my rows are lined up, so that's now going to be my side slit. So now what I want to do from this point is make sure that all my rows going up my side seam are nice and even, nice and lined up. So I'm going to do that. So now every couple of rows, I'm just going to get a stitch marker and just pin the rows together just so it all stays while I'm doing my seam. So I'm pinning about every 3 rows together. Just like so. All right, and then once I get to the armpit, I'm just going to turn and line up the rows of my sleeve. In the exact same way I did my side seam, just so that when I start to sew it all together, it is nice and even, and we don't have rows that are, the front rows are above or below. Everything is nice and even. So when you hold it and look through it, you should be looking right through each row just like that from front to back. So everything should line up nicely. So just go ahead, pin it together, and then you're just going to sew it together in the same way you did your shoulder seams. So go ahead, measure out your side slit, mark that off, and then just pin your piece together nice and evenly, and then sew it all together. And a couple of quick things before I send you on your way to finish off your seams. Just be sure that when you're working your seam, to ensure that you're putting 2 stitches in the side of each row, just to make sure you don't sew it too tight. And then also, I suggest when you're doing your seam down the side, work from the armpit to the top of your slit so that you can try it on, and if it's too deep or too shallow, you can always pull out the seam and adjust it there. But if you go from this end up, then you'll probably have to rip it all out and start over. So just remember to place 2 stitches in the side of each row as you're working your seam, and work from the armpit down to the top of your side slit, just so if you need to make any adjustments, you can do that nice and easy. All right, so go ahead and seam it up, and I'll meet you back when we're all done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more. Thank you for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. So until next time, take care and bye for now.